The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild. Where do I even start with this one? This is not only one of the most praised video games of the last decade, but quickly becoming one of the most praised games in video game history. Honestly, it's unbelievable what this game is, considering the state of the Zelda franchise prior to its release. Breath of the Wild is a remarkably rare example of a stagnating series recognizing that its commitment to tradition and expectation was starting to hold it back. The dedication shown here in rethinking a core Nintendo franchise is admirable, paying off to an incomparable degree and creating a genre-defining masterpiece that demonstrates some of the best qualities of video games as a whole: adventure, discovery, and freedom. It's probably no surprise if you know anything of my tastes that I really like this game, but of course, in having so many bold changes, not everything in Breath of the Wild is as well executed as it could be. In this video, I'm going to lay out what I found to be the best and the worst aspects of this game. Be warned that full spoilers for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild are on the table. The best. Number 1, the definitive Hyrule. This is one hell of an open world game. Most entries in the Zelda series take place in Hyrule, but here it actually is. This is Hyrule, masterfully executed and home to superb iterations of tons of classic locations in the series. Hyrule Castle, Death Mountain, Lake Hylia, the Lost Woods, so many places so brilliantly realized in this 3D landscape, it's jaw-dropping to discover on your own. There are so many secrets and surprises to be found everywhere. Time flies playing this game. There's just so much care put into everything that it's effortless to be captivated by it all. Hyrule Castle is enormous, with tons of rooms so it actually feels like a place people lived in. Towns are similar, with plenty of homes for all the NPCs, who even have their own schedules. Enemies and wildlife are generously littered throughout the world, helping it feel more alive, while the excellent sound design and subdued background tracks immerse you in it even more. I can barely describe how cool it is to see a divine beast roaming the land while you're out adventuring. It's awesome, depicting clear problems that need to be dealt with throughout the land. Overcoming dungeons has never felt more worthwhile. The art style of this game is also a delight. With its exceptional lighting and imagery, this is a beautiful world to take in. Worth calling out Death Mountain, an exceptionally cool volcano. The smoke and lava combined with the heat and particle effects are remarkably impressive, presenting probably the best volcano I've seen in a game. And that's just one example in a game packed with places like this. Don't even get me started on the Gerudo Desert, my favorite region in the game, hosting a lot of inspired ideas. I haven't even mentioned the stunning beauty of the Akala region. Autumn-themed hills? Yes, absolutely. This iteration of Hyrule feels like it goes on forever. There's just so much to experience here. It's a mind-blowing place hosting so many moods and themes that it's easily one of the best open worlds I've seen, and a huge step forward for the Zelda franchise. Number 2, culture and character design. Exceptional world design wouldn't be possible without well-crafted towns and characters. And not to worry, because the cultures in Breath of the Wild are effortlessly appealing. Every settlement boasts unique assets and housing. Interiors feel warm and lived in with varied layouts, lending to towns and NPCs a lot of identity. The homelands of the various races are the real standouts. These places are fascinating renditions of classic Zelda races, with their own rules, occupations, sleeping habits, and philosophies. NPCs, Hylian or otherwise, have a fantastic amount of variety in their models, with different skin tones, body types, and clothing. Everyone has their own name, securing them as individuals. For the first time, you even get to see old and young versions of these races, and it adds so much to the authenticity of these societies. The children are even cute. How often does that happen? The Rito village, situated on a spire, is especially charming. The Zora's domain has a magical aura all throughout its halls, and the Gerudo town is a complete triumph. This is unquestionably one of the best towns in the franchise, packed with original ideas for how the Gerudo people live and what their priorities are. They ride on sand seals, an appropriately Zelda-esque solution to desert travel, and super freaking fun. They have their own language, they go to school to learn about love and cooking, and guard their female-only society from men and bandits. All of this turns the Gerudo, who have only only ever felt conceptually underdeveloped into one of the most realized races in the series. NPCs strike a nice balance in fleshing out the world believably without feeling like exposition dumps, and since they have their own roles and relationships, they feel more tangible than ever before. This is some of the best NPC dialogue I've seen, especially in recent years, being informative and concise while also bursting with charisma, and so many of them are memorable because of this. Examples include the eccentric carpenter Bolson, the terrible cook who treats cooking like a battle, and of course the lady crazy about not stepping on the flowers. Just the fact that these two random Sheikah that appear briefly in one cutscene have their own unique designs says everything about this game's dedication to detail. Breath of the Wild also goes for a bold new look with Link's design, trading in the green tunic and hat for something a lot more refreshing. And honestly, this choice really paid off. This is the best Link's ever looked, and changing his clothes is a great option for personalizing him to your own tastes. Other standouts include the charming Prince Sidon, the Rito champion Revali and his spiritual successor Teba, the brilliant parrot-like Rito Cass, and of course, Riju and the lovely champion Urbosa of the Gerudo. This is incredible character design. Enemies are also worth calling out, many of which are expressive with a few gnarly ideas here and there. I also appreciate Calamity Ganon's unique design. It's a shame he has basically no character in this game, but an eldritch monstrosity is an imaginative change of pace. A few crucial characters unfortunately got the shaft with their designs, but trust me, I'll get into that more later. Number 3, freedom and discovery. Breath of the Wild lets you choose how you want to go about pretty much anything. Exploration, combat, solving puzzles, everything you do is filled with possibility. Freedom flows throughout this game's design non-stop, ensuring a satisfying and personal experience. You can climb just about anywhere, use runes to affect the environment, objects, and enemies in all sorts of ways, find and catch wild horses, and even tie balloons to things to float them up into the air. There are entire physics, weather, and elemental systems with loads of consideration put into their effects, creating an endless amount of approaches and interactions. Despite the depth of these systems, they're really easy to understand and use. Sure, you'll meet resistance at times, but there are always options for dealing with said resistance. This game's a dream for players who like to experiment. Thinking outside the box, you can go and do just about anything. Even preparing meals is simpler than in most games with cooking, really only asking for a basic understanding of how it functions while dropping unnecessary elements like finding recipes or following strict procedures. Just dump the ingredients in a pot. The freedom on offer is spectacular, and an important part of another great strength of Breath of the Wild, discovery. This is a rich world to explore. It's really fun to scope out places in the distance like shrines and other oddities, and then work out how to get there. And there are plenty of unexpected things to find as well. Massive canyons, rainy jungles, ruins engulfed in darkness, towering labyrinths, it's a lot. Lurelin Village is the perfect example of something interesting and unique that's 100% optional. Nothing in this game ever sends you to this place. It's there for you to find on your own, and that not only rewards you for going off the beaten path, but helps the world draw you in more naturally. I can barely convey how enchanting it is to come across a dragon in the wild. Your first encounter with one of these creatures is so magical, it's unforgettable. Discovering hidden Koroks is a lot of fun, maybe a little too fun, and rewards careful observation of your surroundings. Got a quest or looking for a hidden shrine? Well, figure out how to solve it on your own with the clues given to you. For a series that was only getting more handholdy, it's so gratifying to see responsibility put in the player's hands for a change, and the world is more engaging than ever because of it. Number 4, quality improvements. After Skyward Sword's ridiculous amount of unnecessary guidance and handholding, I never would have imagined the next 3D entry would be such a contrast. While the basic story and gameplay elements are still explained, Breath of the Wild is good at just letting you play it. Interruptions to gameplay are extremely reduced compared to previous titles, with short, direct explanations for basic actions. Items are quickly picked up, only prompting a description if something is new. Story dialogue and directions are as brief as can be while still expressing enough personality, rarely forcing themselves on you while out adventuring. And as I touched on before, while past games would often beat you over the head with any enemy, puzzle, or hindrance in your way, this game consistently leaves figuring things out to the player. You're actively playing the game more. You're battling, exploring, and thinking about a puzzle and how to solve it all the time. Interface design is fantastic, and snappy equipment and rune selection speeds things up so you don't spend long in menus. The paraglider can be immediately deployed anytime in the air with a nice momentum to it, and feels very naturally integrated. The controls are very well thought out. Most of your actions are only a button press or two away. The bow in particular is a lot of fun to use, using the supplementary motion controls for really accurate aiming. Nothing is more satisfying than slow motion headshotting enemies in the air. Shield surfing is one of my favorite new additions. This is a smart way to not only give shields more utility, but move downhill quickly on the fly for a small durability cost. A lot of time was clearly spent ensuring Link's actions are fun to do on their own. That's Breath of the Wild's mechanics all around. Well thought out, unique, and empowering. Number 5, a few more things. I'm just gonna list these off. The Divine Beast assaults are a blast, particularly the ones against Ruta and Naboris. Ruta's involves riding side-on over the water, avoiding ice and shooting weak points while riding up waterfalls. It's incredibly energized. Weaving through Naboris' legs sets a similar vibe while you blast away at its hooves with bomb arrows. It's an invigorating set piece with an awesome track accompanying it. The other two are a bit more basic. Mado has nice visuals going for it, but is way too easy and over before you know it, and Rudania's is kind of just a stealthy escort mission around the volcano. Even so, they're all enjoyable, memorable parts of the game. The Divine Beast dungeons themselves, while not as fulfilling as many of the classic dungeons of the franchise, are a refreshingly different take on the idea. Manipulating their various body parts makes for interesting layouts and unique puzzle design, with Naboris being the highlight of the four. Shrines are similarly simplistic but satisfying to conquer, and take good advantage of this game's freedom, often having multiple ways to be completed. Rupees finally have good value, with so many desirable outfits to buy. No longer having a wallet limit also means you can fully reap the rewards of any treasure troves you find. Money is no object by the end of the game, but the economy is well balanced throughout. Rupees have never felt more relevant. You can buy a house, which while unnecessary is all the more charming for its inclusion. Last thing worth calling out is the Master Cycle Zero, which, geez, after I got this, I never used my horse again. I'm not a motorcycle kind of guy, but this thing rocks and can tackle all kinds of terrain with ease. As silly as it is, I love how fun it is to ride around on, and it's probably my favorite thing to come out of the DLC. That was a lot to cover. I broke down what I believe are the greatest strengths of this game, and looking at them now, I appreciate how many choices were made to guarantee a fun, rewarding experience. But of course, being so massive while boldly casting off its conventions, this game was bound to have plenty of ideas that didn't work out so well. The worst. Number 1, crucial designs and voice acting. While I complimented many of the characters earlier, there are some major exceptions for a few critical characters in this game. Let's start with the lamest, most unlikable iteration of Princess Zelda in the series. This is an ugly design. I prefer my Zeldas to either emanate mystical power or charming likability, and Mustard Brows over here has neither of these. I understand her character is the tiresome, destined for greatness, but the pressure is too much and causes you to fail, ultimately awakening your power at the last second while your trash bag father only makes it worse. But that sucks, and leads to a completely unappealing Zelda. I admit it's a new direction to take with the character. They clearly didn't want her to be perfect this time around, but this is way too far in the other direction, presenting a character too pathetic to be endearing. She barely feels like a princess, and rarely comes off as intelligent or capable. What what are you supposed to like about her? Self-conscious worrying is basically her whole character when she's not yelling at Link for her own insecurities, or having a forced OMG research moment where she only comes off as obnoxious. Way too much focus is put on her failures, and they're barely redeemed by the end. One of the biggest contributors to such a poor execution is her distractingly unfitting vocal performance. She's not by far the only character who got a bad dub, but hers is especially awful, whiny and graceless.
I thought I made it clear that I'm not in need of an escort. I'm trying to be a bit more empathetic. Benefit of the doubt, you know? So I really am just a failure.
For the record, I played with the English voice acting as that's what I speak, and I can't believe this delivery was honestly given the green light. She also makes this face. But after Zelda, we have the horribly miscast King of Hyrule. This is the perfect example of listening to someone clearly not fit for a role attempt to put on a gruff, older tone. And it's so unnatural, all I hear is the actor trying to do a voice.
It devastated everything in its path, lo, a century ago. You must be single-minded in unlocking the power that will seal Calamity Ganon away.
Not a fan of the design either, and he's pretty much written to be unlikable. Impa's voice acting is another bust. Someone else trying to put on an elderly voice that just sounds fake, pulling me out of the game every time.
It has been quite a long time, Link. The history of the royal family of Hyrule is also the history of Calamity Ganon.
And why does she look like a gross little goblin? This design is not doing her any favors. The last vocal performance worth calling out for just how bad it is the great Deku Tree, who is also miscast. A powerful voice would be perfect, but it has no punch at all. If anything, the actor sounds like they're about to fall asleep.
Well, it's you. Many have referred to me over the ages as the Deku Tree.
Not all of the English voice acting is rough. Urbosa and Rivali are great examples of appropriate casting and good delivery. But ultimately, the voice acting does a lot more to take away from this game than add to it, and I truly wish they went with stylized Hylian instead. Number 2, looks like rain. I doubt this surprises anyone. I love the rain in the real world, and in most games too. It sets a comfortable atmosphere and mood, but unfortunately, a few key decisions with how rain works in Breath of the Wild ensure it's little more than a miserably annoying mechanic. While out exploring, you'll likely spend a lot of time climbing, but if it starts to rain, surfaces become slick. When this happens, trying to climb up anything more than the smallest of rocks becomes very difficult, as you'll constantly get pushed down. Your climbing ability is hindered so much it can barely be utilized, often screwing up an ascent midway, basically forcing you to fall and start over. It's incredibly frustrating how often it rains, because it puts such a hard stop on an essential part of exploration and even some puzzles that require fire. Even worse is how long it takes for the weather to change. Sure, you can use a campfire to speed things up, but if it's raining, sometimes you won't even be in a place where you can start a fire. Waiting it out naturally takes too long, and half the time there's another rainstorm coming right after. At first it didn't bother me much, but it becomes so inconvenient it'll grate on you more and more throughout a playthrough. Thunderstorms add an extra layer of tedium, with metallic gear being struck by lightning, forcing you to swap your stuff out every time you wander close to one. There are some creative interactions you can do with this, but it's annoying to have to switch equipment out, and happens too frequently. The rain wouldn't be so bad if it just made climbing cost more stamina, but the way it keeps pushing you downward makes it hard to get up even the smallest of heights. It's pretty overtuned, and turns rain, something I've never really had a problem with in a game before, into an overly restrictive irritation. Number 3, nuisance enemies. Yet another hindrance to getting in the way of exploration is the relentless ambushes by stall enemies and the Yiga clan. God forbid you're exploring for more than 5 seconds at night without stall enemies spawning around you. It's way too frequent, enough to ruin nighttime exploration entirely. Yiga clan assassins are also obnoxiously frequent, but at least they're gated behind completing the Yiga hideout, so you can put them off provided you know that. Hopefully most of your overworld exploration is finished beforehand, as it basically doubles the problem with the stall enemies, and even worse, they can appear during the day. Both of these enemy types should spawn maybe a third of how often they do now. Outside of very early on, most enemies won't be much of a threat, so constant ambushes just feel tiresome. There's not a lot of incentive to bother with most enemies, and they're often easy to ignore. There's little reason to respect enemies in this game. They're just so easy to dance around, and since weapons degrade, and you rarely get anything worthwhile for taking out camps, you basically have no reason to engage with combat unless it's some part of a challenge. Considering how many enemy camps there are, it's a shame they're so unrewarding to bother with. It's just not worth wasting your weapons to get a bunch of junk in return, so most of the time it makes more sense to just ignore them. This moment on Eventide Island really shows just how unthreatening they can be. You have to grab an orb surrounded by enemies, but instead of slowly picking them off or going with a stealth approach, the most productive way to do it is to just ignore them, run in, grab the orb, place it where it needs to be, and run out. They're that easy to chump. Whenever presented with situations like this, there's rarely any benefit in fighting. On top of all this, enemy types are pretty lacking overall. While the ones we do have are fleshed out, there's only about a dozen or so basic kinds of enemies. By the end, I was tired of most of them. Number 4, Master Mode and Health Regeneration. Master Mode rhymes with disaster mode. Okay, it's not that bad, but this is far from what I'd consider a satisfying master mode. Regenerating health. Really? Could you not think of any other way to increase this game's difficulty or change up combat? Constantly regenerating health as a mechanic is straight up not fun. God forbid you go more than a few seconds without dealing damage before something starts rapidly regenerating its HP. This simple change does make combat more demanding, but also goes against the entire overarching theme of the game of freedom and experimentation. In normal mode, you can approach combat in lots of different ways, and utilizing your environment, you'll have even more options. But when every enemy has regenerating health, combat becomes completely one note, as it really only allows hyper-aggressive rushdown strategies. Trying to battle any other way heavily drains your resources and takes a very long time. Enemy health won't regenerate forever. Thankfully, there is a cutoff, but this is just an awful design choice. This is the least interesting way of making the game more challenging while simultaneously diminishing some of its greatest strengths. The boss rematches and Trial of the Sword highlight how unfun the regen can be, especially against Waterblight Ganon and in the earliest trials. In particular, floor 10 of the first set of trials includes 2 high-leveled Lizalfos enemies that deal a ton of damage, fall into the water easily and take cheap shots, take a load of hits to bring down due to your crappy weapons, and ultimately come off as untested, as the only reasonable way to deal with them is a complete abuse of the stealth system. There was no way I wasn't going to bring this room up. It should have been taken out and reworked entirely. Ideally, Master Mode would be designed in a way to encourage more out-of-the-box thinking, instead of discouraging it, but health regeneration is what we got, and it's just not fun. Number 5, a lot of little things. I'm just gonna list these off. The frame rate can be pretty rough. Most of the time it's fine, but it easily gets choppy in areas with a lot of light and moving elements, and is really bad in a few specific places. Korok Forest gets the worst of it, but Rito and Kakariko Village are other notable examples. The Yiga hideout is a short segment, but can be a huge pain in the ass because of how sensitive the Yiga AI is. You can get through it smoothly enough if you know what to do, but it can easily become one of the worst parts of the game because of the AI. While shrines are generally fun to complete, a good amount of them are clearly included just to pad out the numbers. The first being combat shrines, which present simple fights against guardian enemies that barely differ from each other, so they quickly become routine and boring. If these had their own enemy selection, they'd be a lot more interesting. Blessing shrines are similarly uninspired, rewarding the player for just finding them, and that's okay, but there's far too many of them, with some asking for very little to be found, such as bombing a cliffside wall or climbing a tall spire. Side quests are largely unrewarding, requiring far more effort and time than they're really worth. At least they flesh out the world and NPCs. As fun as the Master Cycle Zero is, it's only available after completing the Champion's Ballad DLC, which is only available after completing all of the Divine Beasts. Basically, it's given away way too late, after you've likely explored the majority of the world. The scene where you get the Gerudo outfit isn't very tasteful. It feels like they're making fun of people, and I'm not a fan of the vibes. This next one's hardly a little thing, because I absolutely despise the horrendous laser pointers the Divine Beasts ruin the sky with after you reclaim them. This bothers me so much it almost got its own number. Why would you destroy this gorgeous skyline for these ugly lights that destroy the entire view? These didn't need to be here. My final complaint, and another one that really drives me nuts, is the constant referencing of events, history, and technology from 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago. I can't stand any game or any form of media that throws around bloated numbers to create some fake sense of epicness. 10,000 years ago, this kingdom was still called Hyrule, ruled by the same royal family. They say this. The Zoras have apparently upheld their oath to the king and had this dam for 10,000 years? What? Does anything ever happen in this world? Is there any history to it at all? Because the game's giving me the impression that nothing meaningful has ever occurred in this world's history outside of the appearance of Ganon. Why is everyone still living in medieval conditions? I'm sorry, the blue flame Sheikah furnaces have been burning for that long? Sheer lunacy and ridiculousness. You might as well have said a bajillion years. I'm not surprised I had a lot of complaints considering how much there is to this game, but regardless of all those issues, this is one of the best Nintendo games in quite some time. Breath of the Wild has opened up this series to tons of possibilities. The tremendous changes this game makes from the standard Zelda formula the series has known up until now will no doubt not be for everybody, but it's an extraordinarily ambitious project, presenting the most brilliantly realized Zelda world ever seen. Breath of the Wild is one of the most enthralling games I've played in the last decade, with its focuses in all the right places, and I couldn't be more grateful to see this series going in such a bold new direction while mastering so much about it at the same time. Thank you all so much for watching. If you liked my video, subscribe and check out my Patreon. I'll see you next time.